Judging by the correspondence I personally received from some very high quality subscribers to the Nutnfancy project, you are looking at 2 combat veterans on the Nutnfancy reviewing table. No, not these knives specifically, but ones just like them. On the top, the Cold Steel Peacekeeper 1. Older version in 420, bead blasted stainless steel, resharpened for me by Zach Wood to razor sharp levels. This is the same knife you saw several years ago when I first reviewed the Peacekeepers. On the bottom, the Peacekeeper 2 USA manufactured carbon 5 steel. Wicked effective, what I call combat daggers. High value, high quality, lightweight to carry. I highly recommended them in that review years ago for integration into your soldier systems, especially if you're engaged in urban combat operations. And yes, that's exactly what these TMPers did. Military members reported great success in integrating the blades into their LBE. Fortunately, they did not have to use them in combat operations. I'm talking in defending their lives. I'm glad to hear that. But they were easy to carry and they function in other utility roles quite nicely. They report to me. That's the Cold Steel Peacekeeper series. But it's not all about Cold Steel, and there's other manufacturers out there producing equally good, what I call combat daggers or combat knives, whether it's SOG, maybe it's Boker. I might show some as the review progresses. And in this day and age, it's actually pretty commonplace to find this level of quality and this level of value. It was not, however, always that way. If we go back to the 1960s, for instance, the knives that most of the troops in Vietnam were using were hunting blades. Carryovers from the 1950s into the 60s, there really weren't a lot of purpose-built, no excuses made fixed blade combat knives from major manufacturers. Very few. Enter the legend that has now become the Gerber Mark II. Conditions were ripe for this knife back in the mid-1960s, since the stage was pretty much barren of knives like these. Yes, there were some customs. There were probably a few factory ones I've forgotten, maybe some obscure ones. But honestly, there wasn't a ton. Maybe the Randall number 1, very expensive. So when the Gerber Mark II came on scene, it took off like a wildfire with soldiers in Vietnam for good reason, and the reasons I'm going to cover here, Nutnfancy style, via this. We'll talk about it. Also, this is going to be a 2-for-1 knife review. I want to talk about the Gerber Mark II, of course, and also its brother, the Command II. Introduced in 1980 or so, the Command II has been reintroduced for 2011 in a 1,500 piece limited edition commemorating the 30th anniversary of the blade. Although some would contend it should go from 1980 to 2010. We won't care about that so much. And I gotta tell you, reviewing knives like this is rather daunting for me, because they're very storied, they're almost fabled in their existence. There's lots of fans of them. There's lots of knowledgeable people who collect both styles of knives, and if it's not the Command II, maybe it's the Guardian II by R.W. Lovelace, also an excellent blade, probably my favorite of the series. And other variations, maybe the predecessor to the Command II, the Force II. Lots of guys collect them, and so there's a lot of knowledge out there. And honestly, there's lots of variations of the Gerber Mark II through the years. Differences in, blade designs, steels, variations in the handle, the colorations, all kinds of sheaths have been part of the Gerber Mark II history through the years. And no, I'm not going to cover them in this Nutnfancy tabletop. I don't have time, for one, and two, I don't think I would do it justice. There's so many differences and small variations in each model, I'd probably screw up the details. My focus is going to be on these versions, available to you right now. And via the way I always do it, I'm going to give you my take on what I've always called 2 kinds of cool. That is, first kind of cool, capability and roll, versus today's combat daggers, is a Gerber Mark II, the Command II, still a viable and smart option? I will attempt to answer that. I'll give you my honest assessment of that, as I always do. And then also, as we go down, we have to take into account the second kind of cool for both of these blades, and that is they're just cool. They're fun to own. They harken back to the Vietnam era when they were so beloved, when so many of those troops came home and, having served with a Gerber Mark II strapped to their side, they just became Gerber fans overall, and some of them even established their own Mark II, maybe Command II collections. We'll go through that as we go along, and let's jump into it right now. Philosophy of use. Well, I kind of already introed with it. It is a combat blade. That's what it was designed for. I'm talking Gerber Mark II. The Command II came later, of course. But this was an outgrowth of the Fairbairn Sykes dagger of World War II, right? And the designer, what was his name? Bud Halsman, Captain, U.S. Army, collaborated with Pete Gerber back in the 1960s. They went back and forth. He had a very distinct idea of how he wanted to upgrade the Fairbairn Sykes dagger, is my understanding. And out came the first edition of the Gerber Mark II back in 1966, and it was groundbreaking from a U.S. knife maker. Groundbreaking. You could not find, again, you couldn't find a knife like anywhere, especially for the cost. Lots and lots of troops bought it, and it was very popular within the special operations community, Green Berets included, during Vietnam. That's because I think in its limited function as a combat dagger, it was and could be very effective. And it is a very limited function. It is a thrusting weapon, and I think for the slash attack, and again, we have to talk about this to review the knife honestly, I don't think it's a great choice either back in 1967, 1972, or in 2011. I just don't. It doesn't have enough belly. For the piercing attack, it's extremely effective, perhaps even more so than the Fairbairn Sykes dagger. Has a broader blade. And I'll just cover this right now. The blade design of the Gerber Mark II, of course, has been varied throughout the years. The original version, if I'm not mistaken, it actually tapered in the center section, and then it actually had a 5-degree cant to one side, which Halsman wanted. Supposedly for easier boot carrying, so it would snag less, and also it would present at the proper angle, I think, in horizontal carry. Honestly, I would have never been a fan of the 5% cant. Collectors no doubt are, because it's rarer, and was discontinued by Gerber because a lot of the users, soldiers included, thought there was a defect in the blade, sending it back to Gerber, and Gerber finally just gave up and says, you know what, we're tired of trying to explain the purpose of it. Forget about it. Straight blade from here on out. And so the Gerber Mark II carried a straight blade. Also, a reason I don't really dig, or would not dig, the 5% cant is because it's unidirectional, right? Whether you want to cant it up or down, depending on your technique, you have a 50% chance in the heat of battle of getting it wrong. Okay, oh, I'm canted the wrong way. Would you notice that? Probably not. But it's an interesting philosophy. I acknowledge it here. Philosophy of use is a backup weapon, just like it is in 2011. For the soldier, combat dagger, absolutely. It's got good reach, excellent penetration. The Gerber Mark II would serve in that function most excellently. There are some other viable options that will do just as good, if not better, in the thrust type of cut, and also they have improved belly for utility functions. I'll show you some at the end of the video. Philosophy of use also is getting into the second type of cool, a collectible. Just a very cool knife to have, again, harkening back to the history, but also made more interesting by several movies. Witness, Road Warrior with Mel Gibson. He had a 1980s era Mark II slammed into his boot. And a lot of guys took note of that then. Some of them having served in Vietnam. Hey, that's the same knife I carried in Vietnam. And that increased the mystique of the blade. And then came on scene Aliens. And then Bishop, the cyborg, had his Mark II, and he was doing his knife exercise on the table really fast. That was a Gerber Mark II, if I'm not mistaken. And yes, when knives are featured prominently in very cool and well done movies, I might add, like that, it grows their mystique and guys want to own them. The Gerber Mark II, and by way of reference, the Guardian II and the Command II have benefited from that philosophy of use as well. Jumping along in philosophy, it is not, however, a good survival knife. In fact, in that role, I think it would suck. Getting back to a little Gerber Mark II history, as I understand it, they added the serrations to make it seem more like a survival knife. My understanding is the PXs, BXs of the day said, you know what, this is too overt of a killing weapon. We're not so sure we want to carry this knife anymore. Gerber went back to the drawing table and said, hey, check this out. We got serrations. Now it's a survival knife. You know, the PX system said, oh, well, in that case, yeah, here's your pegs. Hang it on there. Don't be fooled by that marketing, and I know for a fact many were, thinking that the Mark II was, wow, this is a survival blade. I can cut down limbs with it. I can baton with it. No, it sucks in that function. It is a purpose-built, look at the cross-section, dagger. In that role, it's excellent. In the survival role, as I have personally found out, using a knife, Mark II, not this one, it blows. It doesn't have good hacking performance. It has no belly. It's hard to baton because it's double-edged. The handle transmits vibration. Yes, in some roles, any knife will work, but as a survival knife, not so much. That's philosophy of use. Quality. It really depends on which version you're talking about, doesn't it? And I know the Gerber guys out there will be nodding their heads going, yep, absolutely. Different commemorative versions were issued throughout the years of the Gerber Mark II, and for that matter, I think the Command II as well. Different steels, and so there can be a huge and lengthy, detailed discussion with varying opinions on which model comprised the greatest quality levels. I will tell you this, though. I think amongst the series, this is the best steel it's ever seen. S30V on this commemorative Command II is fabulous, and I will tell you, it is absolutely razor sharp. Look at that. Dude, that is out of the display case. Well done, Gerber. S30V steel, it is excellent, sharpens, not super readily because it's so hard, but man, does it keep an edge. Relatively rust resistant. Great steel, great steel. 420HC by Gerber. It's okay. I'm kind of kidding because I trust Buck 420HC. Good heat treat, performs like Oss 8. I'm still getting experience with Gerber 420HC. The thing that really throws me back on this version is it comes very dull out of box. I was really tempted to sharpen it because it bugs me so much. It sharpens, or it cuts there okay. Look at that. You could not do that on a sharpened blade. I would never do it on that one, and I don't recommend you ever do it. But I do that to demonstrate the dullness of the 2011 420HC Gerber Mark II. Disappointing. I'm not saying 420HC is a bad steel. It's relatively durable. It's relatively easy to sharpen, my understanding, and relatively rust resistant. No, it isn't the best choice. I think they should have issued it in Oss 8 because everybody knows that. It's easily obtained. Yes, it's an overseas produced knife. By the way, this is made in the United States, and that is a U.S. steel that they integrate into that. But keep in mind, the sheath is made in Vietnam. Bummer. So it's not 100% USA. I'm just saying. 420HC, I don't know. When it was originally issued, the Mark II came out in L6 tool steel. Okay, it's made by Latrobe nowadays. Used for a lot of cold forming dies, coin dies, stuff that needs a lot of toughness. That's L6. Composition, I looked it up. What is it? 0.75 carbon, 1.75 nickel, 0.9% chromium. I'm talking L6, original steel for the Mark II. I do have some experience in it, I believe. I had a Mark I back in the 1980s, and I hated the steel on it. It was almost impossible for me to sharpen. Yes, I was just a teenager then. I still suck as a sharpener, freehand at least. But more importantly, it would rust easily, and it was very brittle. I dropped my Mark I back then, and the huge chunk of the tip just busted right off. So I'm not so sure how tough L6 was. In several collaborations, I'm kind of throwing in some history here. It was issued in 440C, and then I think 154 CM. Maybe it's 440A, I forget. But current versions, S30V, 420HC. That's what you get. I'm talking kind of the steel here, and the quality as well. Overall, I think the quality levels of the Command 2, these versions, is excellent. Okay? The other points notwithstanding. I'll talk about the Sheath when it's appropriate to do that. Weight. How about, and this is a huge selling point for the Mark II and the Command 2 for that matter, 8 ounces for the knife itself. Carry weight with the nylon sheath, which is this one that I just showed you, 11.4 ounces. That makes it relatively portable. Okay, and easy to integrate into your system, especially when you're a overburdened troop doing a 50 km hump. You know what I'm saying? Weight is critical. How many times have I said that? Lightweight knife. The balance on the Mark II is a huge selling point. Let's see if I can do this without it falling over. What does that prove? Pretty much nothing, but it does show a pretty much midpoint balance. Very fast in hand. The Gerber Mark II and Command 2 as well. Blade design. Pretty much already covered that. Through the years, again, different variances in blade designs, different serrations too. I told you why I think they added the serrations. This one kind of, the Command 2 here on the table shows you the original type of Gerber serrations. You know, can you sharpen those? Yeah, if you get a diamond sharpener down there, you could. Difficult. Notice, by the way, the Command 2 is not really a dagger. It's actually a single-sided knife with a serrated top swedge. Look how thick that stock is, by the way. The Mark IIs and Commands have always had that very thick knife. Good for strength, kind of. I think it's a little bit too thick because what it results in is a very abrupt approach to our primary cutting edge, and that makes getting a razor sharp edge very difficult. Easier on this knife, I think, just a little bit. These serrations, by the way, are flattened, and I think they're probably the most practical the knife has seen because they pretty much follow the regular bevel. See how you could resharpen those? I'd prefer to have non-serrated version, absolutely, if I were to choose. Blade design, again, dagger, relatively long. I'll annotate the specs there if you're interested. I always liked the guard, by the way. I think it's cool looking. I think it's functional and comfortable. The handle, jumping down here. A lot of variances in the handle through the years. The original ones had a cat's tongue grip on it, which I think was probably the best the knife has ever seen. My understanding is to produce that, they sprayed molten stainless steel on the cast aluminum grip, and it would solidify instantaneously, and then they would cover it with a coating, and it created a very high traction surface. This knife does not have it. It still features the cast aluminum handle, but it's now powder coated, and I think the traction pretty much sucks on it. Just saying. This handle is identical, by the way. And the knife is not full tang. Has a rat tail tang in there going about 2 inches into the handle, and it is set in there with epoxy. Now some guys may balk at this and go, oh, that sucks, I only like full tang knives. My research, of which I did hours of to make sure I was hearing it right, is that there have not been any or very few failures of blade and handle separation for the Gerber Mark II. Maybe that's a testament of how the knife is usually employed by the guys carrying it, either as a collectible or as a very rarely used backup weapon and not as a survival knife. I think if guys actually believe the hype and go out thumping on it, you would probably see some failures of that. But again, that is not the philosophy of use for the Gerber Mark II or the Command II. It is a defensive weapon primarily and collectible. By the way, that is what they call that, the judo. I forget the name of it. Judo stick pommel. I wanted to get the terminology right. That is very effective in my estimation. And again, I love the length of the Gerber Mark II. Even in this day and age, it gives you a lot of real estate to grab onto and whatever grip you want to go for. And man, dude, that would hurt badly. And it has an advantage over those Peacekeepers in that regard, which just basically have craton grips. This says hello in a very distinctive way if you have to use it. Sheath. Again, let me concentrate on the current versions. Command 2 on the top. Oh, this is kind of interesting. Not really named the Command 2 back in the mid-'80s. It was called the Force 2. And then Gerber had a Name the Knife contest in 1979 in Soldier of Fortune magazine. Force 2 came out of that, but they had already shipped a select number of Force 2 knives, and those are extremely collectible nowadays. The Command 2 superseded. It is identical to that knife, just with a different name. And by the way, both these knives in their various versions can be very collectible, commanding $200 or more on the used market, even a lot more if they're really nice. Sheath on the Command 2 is a leather variety, and guys who collect the Gerber Mark II will know exactly what version this is, or what it was patterned after. And I did it one time, but I forgot, and it's not super important to me, sorry. The leather one is very traditional. I think the quality level, by the way, on the Sheath is good, not outstanding. Outstanding would be heavy leather, the kind we see from sharpshooter systems. Those are good sheaths. I'm not saying they're inadequate, but honestly, for this collectible, the 30th anniversary Command 2, I doubt the sheath will be used much, if at all. On the bottom version, the affordable Mark II 2011 version, this is the nylon sheath, and in my opinion, you guys may vary, this is the best nylon sheath the Mark II has ever seen. PALS compatible, that means it's MOLLE compatible. It's lightweight, it has a very effective thermoplastic liner in it. Cool logo right there. Snap, there's no Velcro on it. It features excellent stitching throughout. And it's lacking a drain hole right there. That's kind of a bummer. And there's something else I was going to say, but I forgot. I love the sheath. It's double retained. Okay, and this is, so I think the thought process back then and now is that you can jump with it. Soldiers, I'm talking. So it'd be airborne capable. The downside is if you have both of those snapped and you're trying to get to your blade fast, good luck. You might want to make a decision of which one you want to unsnap if your mobility requirements allow that. Because if you're hanging this upside down, which the knife is in sheath is very capable of doing, you soldiers, just be careful of that. I love the nylon sheath though. Is it second kind of cool? Absolutely not. But is it first kind of cool? You know it. What's next? Oh, the plot thickens. Competitive options. It's 2011 when I'm filming this. The Command 2's on the top. Gerber Mark II 420HC variety. Right there. And by the way, it would fare so much better if I re-edged that, which I will do, I promise that. I think the competition is very stiff. Again, this is not 1968 anymore. There are all kinds of great options, several of which I've reviewed and waxed prophetic on here in the Nutnfancy project. Witness perhaps the Boker, getting it out of the sheath, Desert Dagger, 12.6 ounces. Wicked knife. Long handle, the pommel could serve in non-lethal strikes. This has been re-edged again by Zach Wood. Beautiful knife. Rex Applegate, Fairbairn, signatures on the blade. I talked about that in the review. I like the broader cross-section of a combat dagger over the more narrow Fairbairn Sykes version. That's just me. That's how I like it. I think a broader planform shears better and is more deadly and produces a bigger wound. Call me crazy. How about this one? Also reviewed, love this knife, the Sog Daggered. About $100. By the way, that Boker Desert Dagger was at the time about $100. 13.2 ounces is this knife. Great knife. Great knife. It has a few serrations on the top. It too has basically the same style of blade the Gerber Mark II does. However, in my estimation, a superior handle. Craton, hard cap. You could use it for hammering, non-lethal strikes. Great guard right there, just like the Gerber Mark II, except this one really provides some serious traction, and it's more hand-filling for most guys. I mean, I think you're just going to get better traction from the dagger. It is 2 ounces heavier. Here comes one of my all-time favorite daggers of ever in the history of ever. Cold Steel Taipan. Oh my gosh, is this an awesome factory-produced dagger. I think I said that in my review years ago. Just beautiful. Wide planform, razor sharp. Goodness. Craton grip, skull-crushing pommel. good guard. The only downside, like I said in the review, is the leather sheath. A little bit slow to operate, and it's not PALS compatible, MOLLE compatible. This is probably my overall favorite factory-produced dagger of all time. That's just the way the cookie crumbles. You haven't seen this one, and it technically is not a dagger, but it is a competitive option. How about the Cat's Alley Cat? Oh, daddy like. Look at that big blade. It's in a funky steel, though. It's in XT70. Don't know much about it, sorry. Look how thick the blade is, hollow ground, wicked sharp. Handle is long enough. In this version, they had a smaller alley cat. I thought the handle's too short, and it's more expensive. 167, I think, is what this one runs. I think they're still making it. And if we compare it against the Gerber Mark II, again, look at the broadness of the blade. We're talking first kind of cool here. The alley cat would probably be my choice there, especially for functionality. I mean, it's not a dagger, really. It has an unsharpened swedge on the top. You could use this in utility roles, which are honestly much more likely. Then we come to one more cold steel option, then I'll end it. Cold Steel OSS in Sanmai 3. Not a dagger, but dude, you talk about capable. This also is an outstanding soldier blade. I'm not sure if they're making that high value steel option anymore. If this one's in Sanmai 3, it's going to be very expensive. Beautiful knife though. I engrave it for marking purposes, and also I'm testing how hard the steel is, and of course the side is a little bit softer. Great handle. However, versus the Mark II, no pommeling capabilities really. Anytime you go with 100% Kraton grip. Better traction, however. A few competitive options, that's all I'm saying. Two kinds of cool. I've been talking about it all along, right? It's a cool blade. Command II and the Gerber Mark II. And let me show you the case the Command II comes with. It's just absolutely gorgeous. Red velvet lined, I believe, oak. And it comes with a card saying and psyching you out that it's 1 of 1,500. It is that, but you're not getting number 1. You're getting just 1 of 1,500. It's still a great blade, a great commemorative blade, the Command II. The handle, I wish it was cat's tongue. I do. I think that is the best handle they made. And they should come out with a commemorative wasp version, non-serrated, gray, just like the early days. I think that would sell very well. I'm sure Gerber probably has that in the works somewhere. This is a beautiful case. The overall presentation of the Command II, the choice of steel, how sharp it is, that's a big win. And I will give each one its own rating and likability scale. Yeah, I know the video's going a little bit long. It's a 2-for-1, dude. And this is a legend, this knife. You don't do a 10-minute review on this knife and do it justice, in my opinion. Gerber Mark II and 420 HC steel runs a ballpark at around $75 or so. I think for that price, it's a good buy. I really do. I think it is a valuable, well, I was going to say valid, but it's also valuable combat dagger option, even in 2011. But it's very narrow in its use, just like I've talked about. It's not a utility knife. It's not a survival knife. It can be a collectible, and it can be a combat dagger, no doubt. Gerber Mark II. I'm glad they're making it. I really am. And I hope it's selling well for them. Command II, Gerber Mark II. That is the Nutnfancy review as best as I can do it. Thanks so much for your support. See ya.